Would you say there's benefits for the singers apart from the experience directly in the 16th century music?
There are benefits and side effects.
When I attended the choir lab lessons as a student, our teachers would always suggest us to rehearse choir pieces without piano accompaniment. Why? Because a piano is always slightly out of tune in comparison to a well-trained ensemble, they said. But what can one rely on if even a piano is supposed to be out of tune? Can a choir ensemble never truly sing in tune as soon as a keyboard instrument is involved? Hello everyone, my name is Jonas and today I want to introduce you to a concert program that approaches this difficulty in a completely new way. Or is it an old way that just has been forgotten? To get things straight, a modern-day piano, or basically any keyboard instrument, if tuned correctly, will do a pretty good job of producing nice and enjoyable sounds. In the so-called equal temperament system, all 12 semitones within an octave have exactly the same distance to each other. This is rather a pretty good compromise than a perfect solution, which was developed over the course of centuries and is especially advantageous towards music that wants to move freely between as many different scales as possible. Why is it not perfect? Well, if you listen closely, you will find some notable differences between intervals played on an equally tuned piano and intervals that perfectly resonate together. And singers, or basically all instruments that don't have fixed pitches like keyboard instruments, can freely modulate and adapt to the tiny differences between equally and purely tuned intervals. So, to cut a long story short, what our teachers wanted to tell us is that we shouldn't always rely on the piano accompaniment to quickly make the ensemble sing more or less in tune, but to give it a chance to at least partially sing perfectly in tune. Fine, but this still means that instruments with keys can never truly resonate perfectly in tune with an ensemble that without accompaniment could more or less easily adapt to the tiny differences of a pure tuning system. Because, let's be honest, if we were to build an instrument that takes all of these little differences into account, we would need far more than 12 keys per octave. You can see that this literally gets out of hand so quickly that it seems to be a far more appropriate solution to just take the ever so slight imperfections of an equally tempered instrument into account in order to ensure that the instrument still is playable after all. And it's probably this practicability ensuring that almost all modern keyboard instruments are tuned in this very good compromise system. However, history could have taken a completely different course if an intellectual dispute in Rome in the middle of the 16th century had had another outcome. In 1551, composer and music theoretician Nicola Vicentino had a discussion with his colleague Vicente Lusitano over exactly the topic which system composed music should be based on. Back in the day, equal temperament was already around, but the preferred solution in most cases in order to bring perfect harmony to instruments with a limited number of pitches was to compromise the quality of certain intervals in favor of others. This led to what we call mean tone temperament nowadays. Even if one could say that Lusitano won the discussion, it didn't keep Vicentino from experimenting around and coming up with several instruments with more than 12 keys per octave. The archicembalo and the archiorgano, both with a staggering 36 keys per octave. These 36 pitches are constructed by tuning a sequence of 12 fifths in so-called quarter-comma mean tone temperament, which means they are not perfect, but ever so slightly too low that almost nobody can tell the difference. Here, you would usually have the problem that the two outermost points of this chain make a terrible sounding fifth. But Vicentino avoids this problem by simply continuing the chain of quarter-comma mean tone fifths into both directions. So until the point where a total set of 19 pitches per octave is reached, this now means for every sharp key you have a flat key that can be clearly distinguished as a different pitch. And therefore, what we associate with black keys on a modern piano, these are now separated keys on Vicentino's keyboard. We even have an additional black key in between E and F, as well as B and C. Now a second manual is added, and on this manual the series of quarter comma mean tone fifths is continued upwards for 12 more keys, which makes 31 in total. In modern terms, we would call these pitches F double sharp, C double sharp and so on, but in order to stick with Vicentino's nomenclature, we will make them their flat equivalent with a dot. When we now go to the end of the entire chain of quarter comma mean tone fifths and jump back to the very beginning, it just so happens that this almost is a pure fifth. So this means we now have a closed circle of 30 ever so slightly too low fifths and one almost perfect fifth, which theoretically allows us to comfortably play in every scale, a possibility that the conventional mean tone temperament definitely lacks. Not enough, we split the black keys of the upper manual again to distinguish between flats and sharps and hereby get to our final result of 36 keys per octave. Of course, comfortably play is a relative term here, since thanks to Vicentino one doesn't only have to deal with a completely different keyboard layout, but also with a system where semitones aren't the smallest possible steps in between two notes, the so-called enharmonic genus. And since in the Western Hemisphere we are nowadays so much accustomed to music with 12 notes per octave, listening to music from that style, but with more than 12 notes per octave, can be a pretty strange and exciting thing to experience. One could say Vicentino's solution in general is to take melodic steps and harmonic progressions into account that are more unconventional to listen to, in order to provide that now a keyboard instrument can accompany an ensemble of non-fixed instruments with respect for the tiny nuances. And so, overall, the intonation will be more delightful. Of course, the accompanied voices now have the big challenge to meet the more subtle differences of an enharmonic instrument distinctly.
And this leads us to the announced concert program, because on Sunday, January 29th, in the Barfüsserkirche at 6:15 p.m, you will have the special opportunity to see and hear the vocal ensemble accompanied by replicas of Vicentino's infamous instruments live in action. I now have the great honor to be joined by Johannes Keller, a real expert on Vicentino and one of probably very few persons on the entire planet who is actually able to play one of these instruments sufficiently. He will direct the 5-part vocal ensemble specially put together for this occasion from the enharmonic organ and the harpsichord respectively. Johannes, it's such a pleasure to have you here to share some insights with us 2 weeks in advance of this concert.
Thank you, pleasure to be here.
Tell us first how you first came in touch with instruments that have more than the standard 12 pitches per octave.
This goes back to a task that I was given in the Musikkundeunterricht, in the lectures about organology here at the Schola Cantorum when I was still a student. That is 15 years ago. And I needed to prepare a presentation about keyboard instruments with more than 12 keys per octave, which were treated as an exotic, strange, dead end of music history at that point. And I became curious, and in the end I just really wanted to hear, to experience these pitches and what they do with the music. And I also realized that there's a lot of music preserved that is that was conceived with these instruments at hand, and that such instruments were not such a rarity and not so exotic as we might think today.
You have been the leader of the Studio 31 research project here at Hochschule für Musik Basel and Schola Cantorum Basiliensis from 2015 to 2017, which aimed to reconstruct the archiorgano and the archicembalo according to Vicentino's construction plans. If it is somewhat possible, try and give us a quick summary how this project originated and how it was conducted.
It had a long story, and I think one of the main inspirations was a harpsichord that I commissioned 2008, if I remember correctly, with 24 keys per octave, and that demonstrated how rich and inspiring this field can be. because it started as an experiment because I was longing for an experience for myself to play and hear this music. And then it became obvious that it's so much larger than just a single musician having a weird instrument at home, because so many composers for contemporary music approached me with the aim of a collaboration. Many pieces were written for that instrument in combination with other instruments or for solo pieces. And I used it so much for early music performances that it became almost my main instrument as a harpsichord player. And then it also became obvious that this whole topic is larger than just me, myself, and that it would be fantastic to have an organ with these possibilities. And that led to the idea that we could create this kind of platform. Started as a research project. By now it's a platform like an open source material collection and network of people and instruments exploring these possibilities.
So we have the Archiorgano right in front of us. Would you please give us a little demonstration of which parts this instrument consists and how they work together?
It all starts with wind pressure that is produced in the bellows. So they are lifted by hand, and these weights here, they push down the top parts of the bellows, and that produces a steady wind pressure that is led in here into the instrument. So maybe you can see it here in the shadow. This is the duct for the wind pressure that pressurizes this chamber here, which is called the wind chest. And here you can see the valves that stop the wind from going into the pipes. They are connected by this roller board to the keyboard. So when I press a key, the movement of the key is transmitted into the wind chest through a system that allows us to have the longer pipes in the center played by the lowest key, and the highest pipes in the left and right played by the upper keys. And that's pretty standard. This is how a normal organ would work. What is special here is that we have 36 instead of 12 keys per octave. That means everything is extremely tight. What you can see here, this whole action only connects the lower manual to the pipes. The upper manual is being transmitted back to the instrument, and there's another roller board going into another part of the wind chest. So it's like a doubled instrument to accommodate all these many keys and valves and pipes.
Please give us a little demonstration of what an enharmonic scale sounds like and how it is even to produce with so many keys.
Yeah, scales are a strange concept on this keyboard because it's never clear which one is the next possible degree in a scale. So if I have a normal scale like a D Dorian scale, I have these 7 obvious notes. Then I can have chromatic notes in between. For example, between D and E, what would it be? An E flat, a D sharp? We have to decide. Mm-hmm. So if I decide E flat, and then between F and G, it's F sharp, and G and A, it's G sharp, and A and B natural, it's B flat. It would sound like this. But of course I could also use the other one. So instead of E flat, I would play a D sharp. Of course, I can also play both of them in succession. For example, D, D sharp, E flat, and E, and so on.
And that's only the first manual included, right? Because you could split up the semitones even further, taking the upper manual into account.
Exactly. For each, now I played the semitone D, D sharp, and then E flat, E. Each of those semitones can be split into 2 smaller intervals called dieses. So from D to D sharp, I can actually sneak in another pitch. And then from D sharp to E flat, it's the same interval again. So this last step was D sharp, E flat. And then from E flat to E, I can also sneak in another one. that gives me this hyper enharmonic scale.
Right now there is the Vicentino 21 research project directed by Martin Kirnbauer, where you also take part in. What is this project about?
This project closes a gap in the research about Vicentino, because we realized having an organ changes completely how you understand and read his treatise and his practice and his vision about counterpoint in the 16th century. And he explicitly states that in many places in his treatise, please go to the instrument, because without the instrument, it's hardly possible to understand what I try to explain here. So since we have that amazing opportunity to have access to his instrument as a reconstruction, we can reread and reinterpret his treatise. And that led us to this project that is happening right now, and we will publish a new translation in German and in English of the whole treatise, and also record all the musical examples from the book on the archiorgano, and some of them also with a vocal group.
So now to the music of the upcoming concert. You and the vocal ensemble will perform music from the second half of the 16th century, not only by Vicentino, right?
Yeah, but mainly. There is mainly music by Vicentino himself, but not from his treatise, where he gives some demonstration compositions, how to write for this specific instrument, for voices. But we decided to perform music from his two surviving prints of madrigals and other pieces. So that is sort of the backbone of the concert program. Music by Vicentino, which is not enharmonic, so not using actually both manuals. I could play the whole concert program on the lower manual, but he gives instructions in his treatise how to spice up normal music to use all the keys of his instrument and all the possibilities of the enharmonic intervals. And that is something that we are going to experiment with for this concert. So I am going to use the whole instrument, all of the keys, but the second manual is not composed in that sense by Vicentino and the others.
Is there a quick way that you can tell us how you approach music by other composers, for example, Villard or Cipriano de Rore? They didn't write those deliberate dots. And also, you said in the concert program, the music by Vicentino doesn't include the dots in the score. How do you approach this? How do you translate this to your organ playing?
The answer to your question has two parts. One part is I can actually do it. So I can take a polyphonic piece by Villard and pick some places where I go to the upper manual, and then the whole harmony would shift microtonally. So I can modify the piece, and I could even notate it in that way. I could almost make an arrangement. The second part of the answer is that once you get used to this technique and you do it as a vocal group and me as a player, it heightens your sensitivity to special places, because you would do that for special words in the text or special moments in the composition. And once you trained that and you're able to do that, it does something with your expectation when you are performing, but also your way of listening to it. So one technique that we are using is to implement these enharmonic moments into a normal piece of music, but then we don't do it. And still it is very different. We take time, we listen really into the harmony. It becomes an importance that you could not organize by just saying, here we go a bit slower and a bit softer. It's more complex than that, and that's a very exciting option for me.
Would you say there's benefits for the singers apart from the experience directly in the 16th century music, like also for context out of 16th century music?
There are benefits and side effects. So you become more sensitive. You might not like it. I have been working with singers, not for this concert, but before who were very vocal about not liking it. It's uneasy, and someone almost threw up in the rehearsal when trying to do these. So it's not for everyone. But once you get into it and you connect to it and you like it, you gain expressivity, sensitivity. You are more aware of things that happen concerning pitch. And of course, that's also beneficial for other pieces. But then once you mastered it, it's hard not to have it anymore.
Hard to come back. Like.
Yeah, so playing Villard with a vocal group on a normal organ is a bit boring now.
There has been a growing interest in all kinds of microtonal music in the recent years. What would you say are the chances in this development, if you can give a little assumption on that?
I agree that there is a very strong curiosity from many sides, discovering so many new things. I see that the dominance of 12 equal as a tuning system is more and more challenged, and I see that in sync with more and more awareness for diversity, cultural diversity, musical diversity, and it would be strange if it wouldn't happen. So in a sense I'm not surprised, and I'm also glad that this reconstruction and our work with it falls into this time, because there is a lot of potential that finds open ears right now.
Thank you so much for the interview, Johannes.
Thank you, it was a pleasure.
Interview take one.
Which camera to look into?
This one, always this one. Okay. And always look at him.
I hope it is clear at this point that it really will be an exciting concert to attend. So if nothing is in your way, come to the Barfüsserkirche in Basel on January 29th. There will be an introduction by Martin Kirnbauer at 5:45 p.m. The concert starts at 6:15 p.m. We will be there for sure, and we hope to see as many of you as possible.